Yes, Janet Jackson, you want this. It's now 10 o'clock, of course. It's Friday. That means we're joined on air by our marketing maestro and all-round good guy, Stephen Barnes. How are you?
Same way, Monsieur Black. I'm fine, thank you.
Wow. What's happening? Besides, of course, you getting ready to go to England.
It's Chinese New Year. It's the day off today. It's deadly quiet. Can you hear the void of the cacophony?
No
this,
construction
today.
Absolutely.
No,
What a pleasure.
not today.
Yes.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So typical quiet Kung Hei Fat Choi day.
I haven't said that. Kung Hei Fa Choi Lai Si Dao Lai. I haven't spoken that language for a little while, actually.
Yeah, well, you have to come back and visit us, right? Do a show live from Hong Kong.
Yeah, I should actually. I do have a plan to come. I've just got to try and work around. So what's happening in the world?
Well, I thought we'd talk about Clay Christensen today, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I was having a little bit of a read on him earlier. Yeah, seems to have been quite a disruptive, innovative chap, so to speak. Well,
he's a professor of business at Harvard Business School. Plus, he has been a successful entrepreneur in his own right. He basically has contributed to the world of sort of business innovation, if you will, since 1997, when he wrote a book called the Disruptive, so the Innovator's Dilemma. And basically, in the Innovator's Dilemma, he kind of explained why existing businesses will never be in a position to disrupt themselves to keep up with the concept of disruptive innovation, which he enunciated in his book, The Innovator's Dilemma. Because incumbent businesses, they'll not disrupt a proven success formula. It's just the psychology of where you are in business, so that when disruption inevitably occurs, it always comes and sort of slaps you around the head and you didn't see it coming.
So if you take a company like Apple, for example, they potted about and did okay, and then they invented the iPod and they completely disrupted everything. So how would that apply in this case?
Well, they created new markets, right? Steve Jobs was looking at the stuff that they did, the markets that they were in, for the first time from the perspective of the consumer rather than from the producing entity. Steve Jobs always said that you should begin with the consumer and work out from that. And essentially, that's how Apple went on to disrupt every manner of sort of human activity, really, in their own way.
Okay. And would these be the principles that Christensen was espousing, or is it slightly different?
No, it's not principles in espousing. He offers explanations for why things are. Okay, and he says that, in businesses, basically, there are three types of innovation. There's something called a sustaining innovation, something called an efficiency innovation, and thirdly, a disruptive innovation. And a sustaining innovation is where, if you're an existing business, you have to look for growth. And the way that you look for growth is basically to develop new products or make improvements on your existing products. The problem with sustaining innovation is that ultimately it's not an engine of growth, because if you bought this year's product, you're not going to buy next year's product, right? You're not going to be buying stuff as frequently as that. So sustaining innovations, when businesses are looking to kind of progress themselves forward with their product offerings, basically end up with these no growth initiatives, which are basically sustaining innovation. So Clay Christensen identified that. And then he identified another type of innovation, which he couched as an efficiency innovation. That's basically where, as an existing business, what you do is you find cheaper ways or faster ways to do the same thing, and you get efficiencies that way. So that those two types of innovations tend to represent the kind of the lot of the incumbent provider of a product or a service, because that's their proven formula for success. The problem there is in that if there's some new innovative sort of angle to what you do, the question is, how does that new innovative angle sort of wheedle its way into the business? Well, Craig Christensen identifies this notion of coming in with your cheaper product that looks less glamorous than what's in the marketplace, but actually is configured or designed to serve a particular small market niche, where basically there's a need for that kind of stuff, but the market is presently being ignored by the major competitors. So if you've got something disruptive and a new way of coming into, serving a certain proposition, you can come in and compete against non-consumption, working on the grounds that the major competitors have ceded because they just don't think it's worth their while. And by going in with that disruptive innovation in that small way first, then you basically gain a foothold and you're able to make changes in the market, the perceptions of what the marketplace might be all about, and then in due course you can go after the rest of the market and thereby basically disrupting from within rather than from without. So the innovator's dilemma, which was written in 1997, sort of got me thinking about how I in my business could apply those notions and seek to benefit from it, because I had the privilege of sort of inside information of my two major competitors, having been a founding partner of one of them. And the other one I had basically spent 2.5 years sort of consulting to at the highest level. So I had insights in what they were all about. So I decided and understood that if I was going to come back into the Hong Kong immigration marketplace, I should seek to provide information and answers to problems that a certain segment of the foreign national community here experience, which is the individual immigration services space. My big competitors were basically competing for the corporate immigration services space in the main, which is 85% of the market by value. But 15% of the market by value is the individual immigration services space. And there's 3 or 4 types of people in Hong Kong that inevitably need to have access to immigration information because they're not able to get that anywhere else. And by providing access to immigration information, in my case, to that particular subsection of the market, which is only 15% of the market by value, I was then able to create relationships and then go on to consolidate myself in the individual immigration services space and become sort of the go-to resource for anything to do with Hong Kong immigration, and then kick on from that through the build out of a new different service proposition that we have for the corporate immigration services space, which is being built as we speak, HongKongVisaSherpa.com. And that's where we're going to disrupt the corporate immigration services space, so finally accessing sort of 85% of the market. That's the corporate slice that presently we haven't really been able to make any inroads into because all those relationships were controlled by the big major incumbents. So that whole notion of disruptive innovation is how it's played out in the Hong Kong immigration business.
Now, if you've established a monopoly in the 15%, that sort of single operator visa kind of business, does the business model that you've created in terms of disrupting that market, will you then be able to roll that out in the 85% portion?
Well, that's the point that I was just making. The HongKongVisaSherpa.com initiative is our new corporate offering. When we're building that website now, and we'll be launching that service in a few short weeks, in fact. So yeah, we've established our foothold in the individual immigration services space, and while we were consolidating ourselves in that position, we then basically were able to turn our attention to the corporate immigration services space and then use the same sorts of concepts and ideas to disrupt the market in the corporate space.
Well, that was
applied in the individual immigration services space.
That's what I was getting to. I mean, your big slogan is free, and the power of free, and giving people the opportunity to be able to do this working with your IP. Would that then still apply in the corporate space?
Yeah, very much so, but with a slight twist on it, because in the individual immigration services space, basically what we are selling to our individual immigration customers is peace of mind. In the corporate immigration services space, in the main, you're not selling peace of mind, you're selling the ability to blame us if something goes wrong. So we can, understanding that dynamic, we can produce a content proposition that allows companies to gain real value out of our organizational methodologies and the resources that you get to be able to complete an immigration application if you're in the corporate environment. We can provide that information so that they can use our resources for free to pull the case together, basically to the point where they've got the potential to hand over to us for value exchange. What I mean by that is they could work up a case by themselves and then send it to us, and then we look at it and then we confirm that it's all in good order, and then sign off and basically agree that we take the responsibility for that case being approved because it's in good order to be submitted. So we can sell that kind of service, which is presently unavailable in the marketplace today.
You said something rather unique there. You said you give businesses the opportunity to blame you. What did you mean?
Yeah. Well, okay. So if you're working in a company and to access this Hong Kong Visa Sherpa service, you need to have a business that's got more than 100 employees. But if you're working inside a typical industrial economy business and you've been given, the job, or you're involved in the chain of responsibility for this, the deployment of this particular individual, in my instance to Hong Kong, to come about, then if for some reason or another that doesn't come about due to immigration, then whoever's in the decision-making chain is ultimately going to look for somebody to blame for this. Right. So where does the handoff go? So the handoff goes onto our shoulders because we're the immigration experts, and we said it was going to get approved, but unfortunately it hasn't been approved. So, in that regard, they're ultimately paying for us, playing to blame us if something goes wrong.
Sure. But the reality is they're really paying an expert because the assumption is that it's not going to go wrong and you're really solving people's problems so it doesn't have to be handled internally.
Exactly, but ultimately we know that we are selling that phenomenon, that is the ability to blame as if something goes wrong, and so our entire proposition is set up to, in a sense, allow them to take comfort in the fact that ultimately they'll be able to blame us if something goes wrong, and their careers won't be compromised by any of this.
So now is Sherpa aimed at middle management or top management? Who would be the person in the near, or which strata would you find the person who would engage with Sherpa?
Well, you see, this is part of the trick, right? What you have to do is you've got to produce content that speaks to certain actors that are involved in the decision-making chain, in the internal purchase of a immigration service from an external provider. So these are the CFO, and the CFO is interested in value for money and efficiency and best practice. Then you've got the HR director, who's interested in the deployability of this particular talent in question, because they're ultimately responsible for getting this new talent deployed in their business in Hong Kong. Then you've got the actual poor Joe inside the company, who we call the staffer, whose job it is to actually do the paperwork and go about submitting the application and managing it through to its practical conclusion. And then you've got the applicant and the family, who are also party, obviously, to this situation inside the company. So it's to the applicant and the family that we're ultimately selling peace of mind, because what they're interested in is getting the visa so that they can start their new lives in Hong Kong. But for the other three parties, ultimately what it's all about is, if there's a problem that goes wrong, do they have the ability to point the finger at somebody and ultimately, find somebody blameworthy for it? And ultimately, when you're buying an immigration service in the corporate setting, that's ultimately what you're buying.
So now, if you had to use these principles and you applied them to a different kind of business, and you wanted to create content that was going to parallel what you are doing with Sherpa, pick a business and see if you can find another way of making it applicable. If it was F&B, for example, or small manufacturing.
Well, here you go. You see, I think that that's what's so interesting about these ideas. You see, I'm not sure that I can do this, because in order for me to be successful, I would need to really understand the business that I was trying to get, to get an insight on, right? Through practical experience, or just having studied it, or just, being in that space. If you're in that space, you've then got an opportunity to understand what your customer is going to feel like.
Okay.
So that's the starting point.
Okay. Well,
so once you understand what your customer feels like, then the general ideas of what we've done, which I've called intelligent content marketing, those general ideas can then be brought to bear into your situation and your understanding of the customer, and then knowing your space and your niche in the way that you do, you can then build a proposition on top of that, that follows the kind of ideas that we've applied in our instance. We believe that what we're doing is universally applicable in certain niches. This is not cookie cutter. It's not a franchise, if you will. It's one size fits all. It's a collection of ideas that you can come and ultimately apply as a connection economy business model.
Okay,
that works.
Let's use my industry expertise then, and see how you would apply your principles to what I would give you as an example. I have a restaurant A. I want to now go out and do corporate catering to executives. I want to sell the proposition of quality, but I know that the MD is less interested in how much it costs and the all of the mechanics of making it work. He just wants to know that if he is entertaining, he shouldn't have to worry. So he has the fear factor, but he passes the responsibility on to lower level staff to make the booking, ensure the menus are done, etc., etc., etc. So if I wanted to create some online blogs or however I wanted to communicate this, how would I do that?
Well, okay. See, this is the point, exactly the point that I'm trying to make to you, Jason. You see, because I don't know the customer, I can't put myself in the shoes of that customer, irrespective of how you've described your understanding of the mechanics of the marketplace. What I can say to you is, like, as a customer myself, if I were thinking about, if I was going to develop some sort of food and beverage proposition of my own today, given that I had, something really special to be selling, rather than, sort of thinking about it being a general restaurant experience, there was just something that there was, let's say, my grandmother's barbecue ribs, right? I build a whole story around my grandmother's barbecue ribs. And I'd have the entire experience around my grandmother's barbecue ribs, and then I'd apply ideas like what would grandmother's hospitality look like, and then I'd come up with online initiatives that sort of propagate those kind of hospitality initiatives, and I then try to build a mini tribe around this experience about my grandmother's barbecue ribs. Now because I'm not an F&B expert, I wouldn't probably never want to do that kind of business, because I think you've got to stick to your knitting. But just generally thinking about how you would take connection economy dynamics and apply them to your proposition, that's how I would begin to sort of approach that sort of thing. And there you can see it ultimately begins with your customer and then what it is that you're going to sell them.
Okay, so if we use the example of Barney's Barbecue by Granny, and then say, okay, what you've said to me before is people approach the internet with a question, and they will put that question into Google, for example, to find an answer. Now, your proposition has always been to create content which gives answers to people's questions. Using that, then, how would you tailor content to answer those questions on Granny's Barbecue?
Well, you can't. You see, you can't. So what I'm suggesting as part of the intelligent content marketing approach is to understand what the internet is all about as a communication medium. And if you understand that it's the communication medium that's at your disposal to communicate whatever it is that you feel that you need to communicate in the way that you have to communicate in order to to communicate the proposition, you've got the means to do that. So it might well be, in this instance, knowing that people are not going to be, going to Google to look for the proposition that I've got, what I'd have is, I tend to want to hang out whatever my content proposition was to parlay that whole idea and that whole experience. I'd just develop the messaging and make sure that on a pay-to-play basis I was appearing where I needed to appear. And then I'd make sure that once I'd gotten people's attention through that pay-to-play initiative, whatever was coming up, after that was definitely going to be of value to them, and it would give me the opportunity to generate an interested tribe around that, and then build a sort of a mini movement around it. That's the sort of approach that I would take, and that's how I go about communicating, knowing that you can't produce content and just expect that experience to appear on search, because no one's searching for those questions.
Now, we speak about products and innovation. What about things that are simple, like just the basic consumables that everybody has or needs? How does one disrupt that market, or is that just not in play?
Well, I don't think it's in play. I mean, at the end of the day, we're seeing some very disruptive things coming along in the way that Amazon distribute, and the physical movement of goods and what have you. Being able to sort of walk into an Amazon store and sort of walk out with your equipment and all that kind of, with the stuff that you bought and all that kind of good stuff. I think there's this disruption going on all around us right now, that you can see, and even though technology is clearly going to improve to cover all aspects of lives, there's still going to be a need to walk across the road to a 7-Eleven at 11:30 in the evening because you run out of sugar, right?
Now, I heard an interesting story a few years back, and I don't know if it was an urban legend or not, but that brand Crocs.
Yes, the plastic. Got them.
Now, apparently they had to rethink what they were doing, and again, this may just be an urban legend, but they were building them so they didn't bloody wear down, and obviously that's not a sustainable business model if you buy one pair and they last forever. Have you heard that or not?
Yeah. No. No, I hadn't, but it makes sense. But I think the counter argument to that would be, I suppose, that you don't want to have one pair that's going to last you forever, but you want to change them every season, right? Because it's a fashion thing.
Yeah, I suppose some would argue that Crocs were a fashionable thing. What's lined up for next week with us?
I don't know. I'll have a think about that on the aircraft flying to the UK tonight.
Now, when are you...
cold there, alas.
Oh, dear. When are you going to be back in Hong Kong? Are you available next Friday?
Yes, I am, but I'll be broadcasting live from the United Kingdom.
Oh, we'll have to check the time then, because you go backwards in time, don't you?
Whatever time of day, sir, I'll be ready for you, standing by.
Fantastic. Well, let's have a catch-up next week. Have a great flight, and look forward to chatting to you then.